everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're tackling something that might be closer to home than you think, asbestos.
Oh, asbestos.
Yeah.
Oh.
We are going through this free online course called Asbestos Awareness from Allison, and it's pretty fascinating. It's a lot more interesting than I thought it was going to be.
Right. Yeah.
So I was reading through it, and it was just like, this is crazy. Like, we have this material that was like the superstar of construction, you know, for its strength and fire resistance.
Right.
But little did we know.
It's wild how something could be so useful like that and then turn out to be, a health hazard.
Right.
It really was everywhere, though. I mean, floors, ceilings, insulation, you name it.
Yeah. So let's back up a sec.
Okay.
What exactly is asbestos? I mean, the course says it's this naturally occurring mineral, but what makes it so dangerous?
It's all about the structure you see. Asbestos is made up of these incredibly tiny microscopic fibers.
Okay.
And when these fibers become airborne and you breathe them in, well, they can get lodged in your lungs.
Oh, wow.
And they can stay there for years, causing damage.
So just breathing in these like tiny little fibers can lead to problems down the line.
Yeah, it's not just like a cough or something.
Yeah.
These fibers can cause serious conditions, like asbestosis, for instance.
Asbestosis.
Yeah, it's a chronic lung disease. And then you have even worse things like lung cancer.
Oh, gosh.
And mesothelioma.
Mesothelioma.
Which is a really rare and aggressive cancer.
Okay, I'm starting to see why this deep dive is so important.
Yeah.
This isn't just like something that doesn't affect us. This is something that could actually be a real risk for people you know.
Right.
Especially people who live or work in older buildings.
Absolutely.
So how do we know if we're even dealing with asbestos? What are the red flags?
Well, that's where the different types of asbestos come in.
Okay.
There are actually several types, each with its own characteristics and levels of risk.
Gotcha.
For example, chrysotile or white asbestos.
Yeah.
That was the most common type.
Okay.
You might find it in insulation ceilings, floor tiles.
So like old houses.
Exactly.
Yes.
Then there's amosite or brown asbestos, often found in cement sheets and pipe insulation. And then you have chrysotile.
Chrysotile.
Yeah, or blue asbestos.
Yeah.
This one's considered the most dangerous.
Okay.
And it was used in things like spray-on coatings and insulation.
So imagine you're about to renovate your bathroom.
Yeah.
And let's say your bathroom was last updated in like the 70s.
Okay.
You start ripping out those old tiles and boom, you could be releasing asbestos fibers into the air.
Exactly. That's a perfect example of why asbestos awareness is so important,
Yeah.
DIY renovations in old homes can be really risky if you don't know what you're dealing with.
Right.
And the same goes for people who work in construction or demolition or any trades that involve disturbing older materials. You really need to know what to look for and how to protect yourself.
So what if someone suspects they might have asbestos in their home? Or in their workplace even? What should they do? Just like not touch it. Call in the experts.
Absolutely. The golden rule with asbestos is, if you suspect it, don't disturb it.
Okay.
It's best to just leave it alone and call a licensed professional.
Okay.
They can come in, assess the situation, and advise you on the best course of action.
Okay.
That might involve just sealing the material or in some cases removing it completely.
Okay. So let's say you are planning a renovation.
Yeah.
And you want to be proactive.
Sure.
Is there a way to find out if there's asbestos present before you go ripping down walls?
Yes. There are tests for that.
Okay.
A professional can take samples of the suspect materials and send them to a lab for analysis.
Oh, cool.
That way you know exactly what you're dealing with and you can plan accordingly.
So you're not just like, going in blindly.
Right.
Yeah.
It's worth a peace of mind, don't you think?
Totally. I mean, wouldn't you want to know if you were potentially exposing yourself and your family to asbestos?
Absolutely.
It's like that old saying, forewarned is forearmed.
Exactly. Knowing the risks allows you to make informed decisions and take the necessary precautions.
Yeah.
And that's really what asbestos awareness is all about.
Yeah.
Empowering people with knowledge so they can protect themselves and their families.
Okay, so we've talked about the types of asbestos, the risks involved, the importance of getting a professional to come in and assess the situation.
Right.
But what about when asbestos does need to be removed?
Okay.
The course mentions something called abatement.
Yeah.
What exactly does that involve?
So asbestos abatement, that's the process of safely removing or encapsulating asbestos-containing materials.
Gotcha.
And it's not a DIY job. It requires special training equipment and strict safety protocols.
So we're talking like hazmat suits, respirator?
Yeah, the whole 9 yards.
Wow.
Think of it like a delicate surgery.
Okay.
You wouldn't want just anyone operating on you, right? Same goes for asbestos removal. It's highly regulated
Okay.
to make sure that both the workers and the environment are protected.
What happens to the asbestos once it's removed? You can't just like throw it in the trash can.
Oh, definitely not.
Okay.
Asbestos waste needs to be handled and disposed of very carefully to prevent those fibers from spreading. There are regulations and procedures for transporting and disposing of asbestos waste at designated facilities.
Wow. It's amazing how much goes into managing this one material.
It really is. It shows you the impact of this issue.
Yeah.
You know, it's not just about individual homes or buildings.
Yeah.
It's a global concern.
Wow. I'm starting to see the bigger picture here. Yeah. This is making me think differently about the spaces we live in and work in.
Right.
And the potential risks that might be hiding in plain sight. It's actually a bit unsettling.
It can be. But remember, knowledge is power.
True.
By understanding the dangers of asbestos and how to manage them, we can make informed choices and create safer environments for ourselves and future generations.
So there's hope.
Absolutely.
Okay, so in this first part of our deep dive, we've covered the types of asbestos, the risks involved, the importance of professional assessments, and the safe removal procedures. And we even touched on the broader implications of this issue.
Yeah.
I'm already feeling a lot more asbestos aware.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. We've laid a solid foundation for understanding this complex topic, but there's still so much more to explore.
Oh, yeah.
In the next part, we'll dig deeper into the long-term health consequences of asbestos exposure, and we'll talk about the ethical and economic challenges of managing this issue on a global scale.
Okay, deep divers. Stay tuned for part 2, where we uncover even more about asbestos and its impact on our world. We'll be right back after a short break.
That's good.
Welcome back, everyone. So after that last part, I'm kind of like, wow, these tiny asbestos fibers, I'm not messing around.
It's like that saying, don't judge a book by its cover. Or in this case, don't judge a mineral by its size.
Yeah, they really do pack a punch.
They do. And as we talked about earlier, those long-term health consequences, they can be pretty serious.
Yeah. You mentioned the latency period. Can you explain that a bit more? Because it's kind of wild to think that you could be exposed to something today and not have health issues from it for, like, decades.
Yeah, it's a bit of a ticking time bomb situation. Unfortunately, we're talking about diseases like asbestosis, lung cancer, mesothelioma.
Yeah.
These can take anywhere from 10 to 40 years.
Wow.
Or even longer to develop after you're initially exposed.
That's a long time.
It is.
So, like, someone could be exposed to asbestos in their 20s.
Right.
And not have any symptoms until they're, like, in their 50s or 60s.
Exactly.
It's scary.
It is. And it makes it really hard to track and treat these diseases.
Yeah.
Because you're trying to connect something that happened way back then to what's going on now with all that time in between.
It's like a big puzzle.
It is.
Yeah.
And it shows how important it is to have detailed work histories.
Yeah.
And to do thorough environmental investigations to try and figure out where the exposure came from.
So this whole latency thing adds a whole other layer of complexity to this asbestos issue.
Absolutely.
It's not just about the immediate risks,
Right.
but the long-term consequences.
It's a ripple effect.
Yeah, exactly. And it raises some ethical and economic questions about how we handle this on a global scale.
For sure. I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
Who's responsible for the healthcare costs when someone gets sick from asbestos decades after they were exposed?
That's a great question.
Is it the company they worked for? The government? Themselves?
Yeah, that's a tough one.
It is.
Yeah.
And it's not just healthcare costs either.
Right, you have to get rid of the asbestos too.
Exactly. Asbestos abatement can be super expensive, especially for large-scale projects like, removing it from schools or hospitals.
Yeah, so who pays for that?
Right. It's a huge economic burden.
Yeah.
And it leads to these tough decisions.
But, like, do we remove it now, even if it's not causing an immediate problem?
Right. Or do we wait until it becomes a bigger issue, knowing that there are those health risks down the line?
It's a tough balancing act.
It is. Weighing the costs and benefits, the immediate needs versus the long-term risks.
You mentioned this is a global issue.
Yeah.
Are some countries more affected than others?
Definitely countries that had a lot of industry and used asbestos a lot in construction, they face bigger challenges. We're talking about North America, Europe, parts of Asia.
Okay.
places where asbestos was just commonly used in buildings for years and years.
I imagine developing countries might struggle even more.
Yeah, they often have limited resources for managing asbestos and providing health care.
Right.
So it raises questions about global equity and responsibility.
Like, how do we make sure everyone has the resources and protection they need?
Exactly, no matter where they live.
It's a lot to think about. This deep dive has really opened my eyes to how complex this whole asbestos thing is.
It is complex.
It's not just about the fibers themselves.
Right.
It's the health impacts, the ethical questions, the economic burdens. It's a mess.
It's a tangled web for sure.
Yeah, but it's not hopeless, right?
No, definitely not.
Yeah.
There are things we can do to reduce the risks.
Okay. So what can people do, like at an individual level, to minimize their exposure to asbestos?
Well, you can't avoid every old building,
Sure.
but you can take precautions.
Okay.
If you live or work in an older building, be aware of the possibility of asbestos-containing materials. Don't mess with anything that looks like it might have asbestos, especially if it's damaged or breaking down.
Okay.
If you're planning any renovations or demo work,
Yeah.
get the materials tested for asbestos before you start.
Good advice.
And if you're hiring contractors, make sure they're licensed and know what they're doing when it comes to asbestos.
So it sounds like it's up to individuals to be aware and proactive.
To a certain extent, yes.
Yeah.
But governments and organizations also play a huge role.
How so?
They set regulations, enforce safety standards, and provide resources for managing asbestos.
Okay.
They can implement policies to phase out the use of asbestos,
Gotcha.
require asbestos surveys in buildings, and provide funding for removal and healthcare.
So it sounds like a team effort.
Exactly. Individual awareness, responsible practices from industry, and effective policies from governments.
It's like a global puzzle that we have to solve together.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
And every piece matters,
Yeah.
from raising awareness to developing new technologies.
To detect and remove asbestos.
Exactly.
This deep dive has made me realize asbestos isn't just a problem of the past.
It's an ongoing challenge.
Yeah, one that needs our attention.
Absolutely.
So in the next part, I want to get your thoughts on something specific.
Okay.
The ethical implications of dealing with a substance that has such a long latency period.
I'd be happy to discuss that. It's an important and fascinating area.
Okay, deep divers. Stay with us as we go even deeper into the ethics around asbestos. Okay, so we're back. And now we're getting to what might be the trickiest part of this whole asbestos thing. The ethics. It's one thing to talk about, like, the science and the risks.
Yeah.
But when you add in that huge gap between when someone's exposed and when they get sick, it gets really complicated.
It really does. That long latency period creates a unique ethical dilemma.
Right.
We're basically dealing with a situation where what people did in the past, has consequences that are only showing up now.
So how do you even figure out who's responsible when the people who decided to use asbestos, the workers who were exposed, even the companies might not be around anymore?
That's a big part of the challenge.
Yeah.
It makes you think about historical accountability.
Right.
Like, should a company that made money from asbestos still be held responsible for illnesses that happened decades later?
Right.
Even if they didn't know how dangerous it was back then. And what about governments that let people use asbestos even when there were concerns?
Yeah, it's like this chain of responsibility that goes way back in time.
Exactly.
And it's hard to know where to draw the line.
Right. And then you have the question of compensation.
Right, like who pays the medical bills?
Exactly. Who covers the lost income?
Who's suffering?
All of it. Should it be the individuals who didn't know they were working with something dangerous? Or the companies that made or used these asbestos products?
Or should the government step in and help?
Right. Even if it means putting the burden on taxpayers.
Yeah. It's a really tough question.
It is. There are good arguments on all sides.
And it's not even just about the money, right?
No. There's the emotional toll, too.
On individuals and families.
Absolutely. How do you put a price tag on the suffering caused by something that could have been prevented?
Right.
And how do you give enough support and care to the people who are affected?
Yeah.
Not just physically, but emotionally and mentally, too.
It feels like we're trying to deal with this, legacy of harm.
Yeah.
That's hard to even measure or fully grasp.
It is. And as we talked about earlier, it's a global issue.
Right. Are there any efforts internationally to deal with these ethical challenges from asbestos?
There are organizations like the World Health Organization and the International Labor Organization are trying to do a lot. They're raising awareness about the risks, promoting safer ways to work with asbestos,
Okay.
and advocating for a global ban on using it.
But, like, is it working?
It's been slow going, unfortunately. A lot of countries still have trouble managing asbestos properly.
Especially in developing regions.
Exactly.
It's a reminder that this isn't just some theoretical debate.
Right.
This is real life.
With real consequences.
Yeah, and we can't just pretend it's not happening.
Ignoring it won't make it go away. It'll just make things worse.
So what can we do as individuals, as communities, as a whole world? What can we do to tackle these ethical problems with asbestos?
I think awareness is the biggest thing.
Okay.
The more people understand the risks, the more they'll demand action.
From governments and companies.
Exactly. We have to educate ourselves, educate our communities, and push for policies that make asbestos management a priority.
So it's about speaking up.
Yes. And advocating for change.
Holding people accountable.
Exactly. Yeah. We need companies to be transparent. We need governments to make stricter rules. And we need justice for the people who have been harmed by asbestos.
This deep dive has really been a journey, huh?
It has.
From these tiny little fibers you can't even see.
Right.
To these huge ethical questions.
It shows you how complicated things can be.
Yeah. It makes you realize asbestos isn't just a material.
It's a symbol
of how human progress can have unintended consequences.
And a reminder to think about the long-term impact of what we do.
It's a powerful lesson, for sure. And it's not over yet. This story is still unfolding.
It is.
And we have a responsibility to make sure the ending is a good one.
Absolutely. An ending where we've learned from our mistakes and taken action to prevent harm.
That's a good way to put it.
We need to make sure the legacy of asbestos is about learning, acting, and ultimately preventing this from happening again.
Well said. A huge thank you to our expert for taking us on this deep dive into the world of asbestos.
My pleasure.
And to all our listeners out there, thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you.
Remember, knowledge is power. And the more we know, the better choices we can make to create a safer and healthier world for everyone. Stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe.